I'll say just a couple of things before I get started. Maybe three things. One, this is the session that I think is going to be the most content-packed, I got the most notes. Two is, I hope that you guys slept better than I did. It's hard to sleep in a hotel like this. And three, I saw some Eagles swag here, so yeah. So well done. Good choices in life. All right.
We'll talk later.
Well, I don't know what there is to talk about. It's already been settled. All right. So last night I tried to initiate the case that the foundation, and actually I'm going to say it differently, that the energy or the fuel of the best marriages is grace. That's the thing that underlies and invigorates the best marriages. Let's use that word, invigorates the best marriages. And that gracious couples do lots of things that we might say are different than other couples, that grace manifests itself in lots of different ways. One of those ways is forgiveness, and that's what we're going to talk about in the next session. We're going to talk specifically about forgiveness, but I think there's a foundation that has to come before forgiveness. That is acceptance and commitment. So if you ask couples, like, what do you think, or what do you have to do to have a good marriage? And they're going to say, you have to communicate well, you have to make financial decisions well, you have to have good sex, maybe. People are going to guess at these things, but I think it is acceptance and commitment. These are the foundations. These are the things that come first. This is a quote from Cicely Tyson. And if you are thinking to yourself, Cicely Tyson, you mean the actress who was in Medea's Family Reunion? Yeah, that's Cicely Tyson. I just think this is also Roots. I think this is a fantastic quote. To be seen in this life, truly observed without judgment, is what it feels like to be loved. She's describing acceptance. Here's a stratified model of conflict. So, I mentioned last night Howard Markman, Scott Stanley, researchers at the University of Denver. Late 70s, Howard Markman started doing research, early 80s, around Denver, in the Denver metro area. Was that me? No? Okay, we don't know. All right. They started recruiting newlyweds and pre-marrieds, and they've been tracking them for 40 years, 50 years. Let's find out what happens for these couples. What are their pre-existing conditions when they get married? What changes over the course of their marriage? And what kind of outcomes do they have? How happy are they in their marriages? And are they still married? And so they've been doing that research a long, long time now, like 40 plus years. And they have given us a stratified model of conflict that I really appreciate and I think is easy to understand. So at the top of the model are what we might call events. And events are the things like when you have an argument. We are mad about something. We are having a fight. You get that notification on your phone that says, you spent how much money where? On Funko Pops? Yeah. We're gonna have a talk about this. That's an event. A thing happens, and maybe there's an explosion. Maybe a volcano's a little too dramatic. But it's an event. We're gonna have a talk about this. We're gonna have a fight about this. We're maybe gonna have conflict about this. Most couples, if you ask them, what are your events about? They'll say, oh, we have issues. And we recognize those issues. And it might be in-laws, it might be chores, it might be money, it might be sex, it might be parenting. We know what we tend to fight about. Those are the issues. And so if you think about this as being like a pool of lava gathering beneath the surface, and it builds up pressure, and eventually it explodes into an event. Well, beneath the issues say Markman and Stanley are what they call hidden issues. Maybe we fight about chores, but maybe we're not really fighting about chores. Maybe what we're fighting about is I really wanted you to do something for me. It was going to be a big help, and you just didn't do it, and I'm wondering if you care about me. I'm wondering if my wishes impact you. Or maybe, we were talking about what we're going to do for Christmas this year, and I made several suggestions, and you just blew them all off. And I'm just wondering, do I have any influence in your decision-making? Do you ever listen to me? Do I have any power in this relationship, or are you just all going to do things your own way?
Yeah.
Did somebody say yeah? Yeah, that sounds good. I didn't know that was an option. Sorry. I heard that. I'm easily distracted. All right, so we got issues, and issues are usually pretty recognizable. Again, this couple shows up in counseling. I say, why are you here? They say, we got issues. These are what our issues are. But pretty quickly, it is these hidden issues. Like, do you care about me? Are you really committed to me? Do you listen to me? Those are those hidden issues that underlie and fuel the issues that eventually explode into events. And the problem that couples run into is when are we going to talk about money? We have this issue of money that's fueled by a hidden issue of care. Well, when are we going to talk about it? We talk about it in the midst of an event. We're mad about it, let's talk about it. And then that doesn't help. That's not very useful. So, but underlying the deepest of hidden issues is acceptance. I think acceptance is really one of our most fundamental human needs. I say that it would be hard for me to quantify all the different ways that our need for acceptance directs our behavior on a day-by-day basis, hour by hour, minute by minute. And I'm thinking, even as I'm walking up here, I got to be careful about the stairs. I really don't want to trip. I don't want to be laughed at. I don't want to be ridiculed. I hope I dressed appropriately, even here, you guys are nice. And I'm like, man, I hope I don't get laughed at. I hope I don't get my words too mixed up. I hope I don't embarrass myself. And you guys get that, right? How much of our lives are driven by, I don't want to be ostracized. I don't want to be the butt of the jokes. And so I think sometimes it can be hard to say, or it can be hard to quantify or say, man, acceptance is just a really fundamental human need. But when you flip it and say, how afraid of ostracism are you? How afraid of being ridiculed are you? Oh, a lot. I will do a lot to avoid that. And I say that, I talk in front of people all the time. College students. I'm terrified of them. They're going to make fun of me. And I'm a middle-aged man who I feel relatively confident in my life. And I say to myself and I say to other people, I don't care what other people think. I know I'm lying. I'm lying. I care what other people think. And you care what other people think. If you don't care what other people think, you're a sociopath. Anybody want to raise their hand for that? All right. So I hope I've made the case. Acceptance is deep, but I want to make it even more so. If we get at Genesis 1:26, this is the creation of humanity. And we know there's an order like Adam and Eve, but in Genesis 1, God doesn't say, let's make Adam in our image. He says, let's make them. So right away, we have a social context. God had in mind multiple humans already. let us make them, and then in our image. So God is pre-existent in a social context. Now, I don't think God was worried about acceptance in his pre-existent state. God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, I think they all accepted each other. They got along. They hardly ever argued about chores. So that wasn't a concern. But it wasn't a concern for humans at the beginning either. So one of the first things we know about God is that he pre-exists in a social state, and the first thing he says about humans is that they're going to be in our image, and there are going to be multiples of them. They're going to have to get along together. And then he creates them. Oh, I forgot. I got ahead of myself. I'll let it go. I got ahead of myself with the button. So he creates them, and the first thing that the Bible says about humans is that they were naked and they knew no shame. So here's a question. How many of you thought about coming here this morning naked? I got one. It's the sociopath. That felt, I don't know you, and that felt cruel. But I don't think any of us did, right? I mean, and even as I say that, like, how would you feel about being naked here? It's like, why don't I just kill me? Because it would generate that deep sense of shame. I would be so mortified to be observed in that way. So acceptance, that's why I really love the Cicely Tyson quote. It's to be observed without judgment, to be seen. I think of myself as a pretty open person. If you see me out in the hall and you're like, I'm going to ask you a question, I'll probably answer your question. But there's a lot of questions I won't answer. Like if you ask me, I'm like, no, we're not talking about that. Because I don't know you. I don't want you to observe me in that way. I would be ashamed of that. Shame is a powerful driver. And so the first thing that we know about humanity, the first thing we know about humanity is its condensation. No, the first thing we know about humanity is that they were naked and they knew no shame. And obviously naked, physically, really naked, but metaphorically naked. There's nothing about me, says Eve, that Adam doesn't know, and he accepts me. I feel no shame in his presence. And there's nothing about me, says Adam to Eve, that you don't know about me, and I feel no shame. There's no part of me that is hidden. So physically hidden, metaphorically hidden, there's no part of me that is hidden. You have access to every piece of me. And I'm not afraid of it, like I would be in a room like this. I would be afraid to be exposed. I'm not afraid of it in that accepting relationship. So what happens? We get here, they eat the apple, and what's the first consequence of eating the apple? Shame. The first consequence is their eyes were open, they saw their nakedness, and they felt shame. This is like the most fundamental loss of sin, is our inability to be connected to God and be connected to one another. Adam, walked with God in the garden, and then he hid from God. Adam and Eve were naked and felt no shame, and then they felt shame. The first consequence is that fear of not being accepted. And it's the most important foundation that grace gives us in marriage. So why is it grace? Okay, I've said that. Maybe I should look at my notes periodically. So it's a fundamental human need. I think we're convinced of that. So we have this conundrum of really needing acceptance, of being created in God's image in a pre-existent social context, a pre-existent social need, but separated by shame. So we need this deep connection, but we can't achieve that deep connection without acceptance. And the only reason you get acceptance is if we have grace. If you got the little devotionals that I sent, I think in one of them I put the lyrics to Waterdeep's, or some of the lyrics to Waterdeep's song, and Don Chaffer wrote the song, and it says, the lyrics go, "And is the juice and the joints of the motion of life." And being the lubricant between people. Like, I see you, I know you, and I accept you. The "and" is the lubricant. It's the little piece in between that makes the connection possible. So we're bringing a lot of friction into these relationships with each other, because whenever you put two people together and they start rubbing against each other, not sexually, they start rubbing against each other, they create a lot of friction, they create heat. And eventually that's going to turn into fire, and eventually it's going to burn down your house. You have to have the lubricant of grace, the "and" that is between one another, in order to accept one another. So grace, and what I mean by that is, so I'm going to say Ashley, because she's my wife. Ashley accepts me not because of how great I am. She accepts me because she is offering me grace. Grace is not synonymous with approval. I do lots of things that Ashley doesn't approve of and that she shouldn't approve of. Don't ask me about them, because I'm not going to tell you. But grace is not synonymous with approval. Acceptance is not synonymous with approval. We don't accept one another only because the other person does wonderful things, only because they look a particular way, talk a particular way, have a particular personality, and is the grace that fuels the possibility of acceptance. If we don't have grace in our marriages, we can't accept one another. We won't accept one another over time. We might for a little while, but not over time. I have here, like, the need for acceptance goes beyond marriage. I've already said that like several times. Like, I want you guys to accept me. I want my students to accept me. I want other drivers on the road to accept me. Like, I don't like it when they shake their fist at me. It's none of that feels good. It goes beyond marriage. But marriage is the place where you are most known. Marriage is the place where we are most vulnerable to rejection. Where if I am not accepted, it's going to hurt the most. Marriage is the place where acceptance is most critical. It's not the only place where we need acceptance or we crave acceptance in our lives, but it's the most critical. All right, acceptance. I'm going to say here, I'm going to grab my coffee, but acceptance can be derailed. Sorry, I walked in front of the speaker. Acceptance can be derailed at two places. And I bet you're not going to be surprised at these. So the first is in a failure to be vulnerable. The reason we fail to be vulnerable is because we're afraid of rejection. And if our fear of rejection overwhelms us, we won't be vulnerable. So I gotta go ahead, I'm gonna show you, all right, I'm gonna show you a picture, pretend you didn't see it. I'm gonna go back and forth a little bit here. There it is. There it is. Oh, no. All right. But maybe I should have reorganized these, but acceptance, like, why can I be vulnerable? It is because we are committed. Like acceptance and commitment. So that's the second thing that we're going to talk about is commitment. But grace fuels acceptance fuels commitment, and commitment fuels vulnerability. Like all of these things are working together. I can be vulnerable because we are committed. If we weren't committed, I wouldn't be vulnerable. And if I failed, I don't know why I've got that so animated. If I fail to be vulnerable, you can't accept me. And I think you guys know what this feels like. If you meet someone new, you're like, I'm on my best behavior, here's my best personality. And you're like, I can't keep this up for long. But this is the me, the most charming version of me. But if we spend much time together, this is going to go away. And so we have to have that commitment so that I am willing to be vulnerable. I'm going to show you the uglier parts of myself because I am convinced you will accept me. So acceptance and commitment are together in a cycle. But the other place that acceptance can be derailed is a failure to accept. So, I make myself vulnerable and someone says, and my spouse says, not really hypothetically, my spouse says, yeah, I don't like that. That's not going to work. You got to change. This is no good. And that gets expressed as contempt. So now you can look. There's Simon Cowell. Right? This is the face of contempt. And he gets paid for that. That's his job, right? His job is to judge. And sometimes he gets exposed to musical acts or whatever, and they are contemptuous. And he has contempt for them. Get off my stage. That's not good enough. That is judgment. That is contempt. Contempt is the rolled eyes. Like, hey, you know what would be a lot of fun? That's contempt. That is, I don't want to hear from you. Not this again. I'm sorry. All right, that's no fun. Let's talk about sex again. Okay, now we're back to contempt. I don't know how to soften this, but you guys know what that feels like, the dismissal. And you're looking at your spouse and I don't know what it feels like. It's never happened. Yeah, great. But I mean, you guys know what the fear of that dismissal feels like. And that is the failure to accept. Now, I'm going to talk about commitment. At the end of the presentation, I've got a couple of slides on how can we be better at expressing acceptance. So yesterday, I said we get in the boat, we pull on the oars, we go in the same direction, steady work in the same direction that is gracious. And so that means that we can practice acceptance. We don't just turn it on or turn it off. We can practice it and we can get better at it. And I'm going to talk about a couple of ways that I think that we can do that before we leave today, which is, what time am I on? This is 9? No, 4. Okay. All right, let's talk about commitment, and I might go pretty quick through this. I mentioned also John Gottman last night, and some of you guys are going to be familiar with John Gottman's work, and one of the things that he tells us is that most couples who have conflict, they have what he calls perpetual conflict, which means they're arguing about the same thing over and over again, and they never solve it. And really, it's kind of like, okay. It's like, all right, we're different. We disagree about this thing. We're never going to solve this thing. You know, we have different levels of, you are really neat and I'm not that neat. And, you know, we're trying to move toward each other, but neither of us are going to be fundamentally transformed into what the other person wants in that particular area. And so we're just going to have to figure out how to live with that for a long time. But one of the things that we know is that most marriages that end with no urgent cause. And when I say an urgent cause, I think if you ask newlyweds, and again, it's no fun to talk about divorce with newlyweds, but if you ask newlyweds, like, why do people get divorced? And it's like, well, you know, affairs, abuse. Those are urgent causes. Like, those are like, there is a rift. That's not why most people get divorced. Most people get divorced because they're like, well, we just kept arguing about the same old thing, and it got boring, and I'm just not sure this person makes me as happy as what is the word? As I deserve to be. I'm not sure I'm as happy as I deserve to be. Vox Media ran a series of articles about relationships in the 21st century. And one of the headlines of one of their articles was, how did dump him become the most popular advice on the internet? Oh, your husband didn't do his laundry? Dump him. You know, I mean, that's the culture that we're living in. That's the sorry. That's a cultural moment that we're living in. As I said, I'm easily distracted. If you move around, I'm going to notice. That's it's the cultural moment that we live in. You deserve to be happy, and if anyone or anything doesn't make you happy, cut it out of your life. Like, that is it's the mental health ethos of 21st century America. And that's what leads to the demise of most marriages today. Is it just, it wasn't really anything in particular. It wasn't really their fault. We just drifted. We just weren't as happy as we once were. No urgent cause, which means no urgent commitment. I think there are a lot of mysteries in the Bible. I'm veering again. There's a lot of mysteries in the Bible, and there's a lot of things that God does where I'm like, I don't know, God. I'm not sure that was the best choice. But all right. But one of the things that I have been, I guess, mystified by a little bit for a long time. Like, God commits to Israel. But the beginning of God's commitment to Israel that later becomes a model of marriage, so when we say, that the church is the bride of Christ, it begins with God's commitment to Israel. But God's commitment to Israel begins with God saying to Abram, leave your land and go leave your homeland and go to a place I will show you. It does not say prior to that, God thought Abram was so cool. Abram was so good looking. Abram was so fun. Abram was so faithful. We don't know anything about Abram. God's like, hey, Abram, you're it. I committed. And he's maintained it now for a few thousand years. That's really remarkable, as God is saying, this is the model that is eventually going to be the model for marriage. It begins with this commitment. And the other thing that is remarkable, and I think I'm going to say this on Sunday, I was thinking a little bit about that, and so I'm probably going to ruin it now, but is God keeps changing the rules in a gracious way. Like God says, I am committed to you, Abram, and your descendants throughout eternity. I'm committed to you. And Abram and his descendants, they keep messing it up. And God keeps saying, all right, let's try again. He keeps coming back. Let's try again. I'm committed to you. And when I say he's changing the rules, I mean, he's like, I'm going to give you grace. You broke the rules, I'm going to give you a way to be atoned for. You don't have to atone for your own sin. I'm going to atone for your sin. God broke his own rules to give us grace, to remain committed. All right, so God committed to Israel. Let me talk about 2 ways. We're going to talk about 2 ways to evaluate commitment, and then I think 1 way that we can practice commitment. So just like acceptance, we can get better at commitment. I think I'm supposed to be done at 9:20. 9:25. Okay. Whoosh. I don't. Okay. How can you evaluate your commitment? Number 1 is scorekeeping. What I mean by evaluate is, as I talk about commitment, you're like, there are ways that you can examine your own commitment and say to yourself, how committed am I? And a signal of that is scorekeeping. So here's Steve and Sally, and they're scorekeeping. And what I mean by scorekeeping is Sally is kind of irritated today. She's a little cold. She's like, Steve, God, leave me alone, Steve. And Steve's like, fine. I'm irritated too. You're going to get it right back. He's getting even. Sally treated me unfairly. I'm going to treat her unfairly. It's what she deserves. She deserves to be treated unfairly. So I'm going to keep it even. Sally, can I make fun of Funko Pops? All right, thank you for giving me that fuel. Sally went out and I spent $1,000 on Funko Pops. I have no idea how much Funko Pops cost. Less than 1,000? All right. Steve sees the charge come through, $1,000. Oh man, Sally, she spent $1,000. I'm going to go spend $1,000 on jeans. I don't know. But you guys get the idea. I need a better illustration. But you get the idea. Like Sally treats herself in some way, and Steve's like, oh, I need to get even. I deserve to get even. I'm going to treat myself in some way. So scorekeeping is that, are we even with one another? Have you treated me worse than I've treated you? Well, I'm going to treat you a little worse. Have you treated yourself better than I've treated myself? Well, I'm going to treat myself a little better. We're thinking in terms of, not we, Steve and Sally, they're thinking in terms of fairness and deserve or scorekeeping. What's the score? So the problem with scorekeeping and why it's an evaluation of commitment is it is only about the short term. Scorekeeping is about what happened today and yesterday. It is only about the short term. Commitment is about the long term. So this is, I think it's Walmart, on February 7th. I think this is Walmart on February 7th, and it's in the red. It lost money on February 7th. And so you might, if you're an investor, this is a bad day, I'm out. I quit this stock. It was a bad day. That's a short-term view, right? Because if you take a long-term view, this is a 5-year view, oh man, it's doing pretty good. Commitment is about the long term. Commitment is about, I'm going to stick with this even though I know there are going to be days, maybe weeks, maybe months of downturn. But I've committed to you, and I'm going to continue to accept you over time. And even here, I mean, you see, like, there were moments. That was a bad day. That was a bad week. That was a bad day. There are these moments over the course of my relationship with Walmart that I was like, come on, Walmart, get your act together. This isn't good. I don't approve of this. But if I commit to it, I get to, experience the benefits of 2025. So commitment is about a long-term view. Scorekeeping is about a short-term view. So that's one way we can evaluate our commitment. The second is satisfaction with sacrifice. Here's what I mean by satisfaction with sacrifice. If I have something that comes into my life that is a blessing to me, and I'm just going to say money because that's the easiest thing to talk about. Like, I think we all get like what that is. So we get what money is, yeah. And we like it. We like money, all right. So for whatever reason, I find $50 on the sidewalk, and I don't try at all to find out who it really belongs to. I just keep it, and I've got this $50, and I say, you know what? I would love to buy Funko Pops with this. I would love to treat myself, but they're $1,000, so it's going to get fun. But instead, I treat Ashley. I sacrifice it for her, and I sacrifice it in a way that says, this gives me pleasure. I'm satisfied with that. It brings me pleasure to say, I can bring you pleasure. I can do something, I can bless you. And by blessing you, that brings me pleasure. That's a second way, those are three fingers. Second way to evaluate commitment is, am I willing to, not just am I willing to sacrifice, but does it please me to sacrifice? And so if you're looking at your own thoughts and you're like, am I scorekeeping? Do I have a short-term view? Can I think of instances in which maybe I've sacrificed and it's pleased me? Those would be signals of commitment, ways of evaluating commitment. All right. Okay, we're going to talk about three ways to get more acceptance. I'm switching gears. We're going to talk about, if we are practicing these things, how can we practice these things? Now, one of the ways is interviewing. There was a research study done, and I'm not going to remember who did it, but the 36 questions to fall in love. This was a psychologist. He brought people into his lab who didn't know each other, and he said, I want you to ask these 36 questions of one another. And they were open-ended questions. And then he asked the two people, how close do you feel to one another at the end of this experience? So these two people, complete strangers, they spend an hour and a half together asking one another these questions, these 36 questions. They're increasing intimacy. And they're like, I feel so close to this person. This person knows me and understands me, and maybe we'll get married. I mean, they were for real, okay, 2 hours later, this person knows me more than anyone else in the world. So that is a way that you can do that. And actually, the New York Times republished those yesterday because it was Valentine's Day. They republished the 36 questions to fall in love. I don't have this up here, but if you just Google 36 questions, you're going to find it in about 150 places on the internet. It's freely available. But the 36 questions to fall in love. So interviewing is saying, I'm going to ask you a question, and if you look at the table talk, I've got you guys describing a vacation. So I'm going to say to my wife, if you could have any vacation, money is no object, anything you want to do, tell me what your dream fantasy vacation is, and I want her to describe it to me. And my job in practicing acceptance is to not make any corrections. So when she says, hey, I want to sail, across the, I'm like, you get seasick. I'm not making any corrections. I'm saying that sounds fantastic. No corrections and no suggestions. Wouldn't you also rather like to do this? Or wouldn't you include this? I'm only listening with curiosity and encouragement. That sounds fantastic. Tell me more about that. So you guys are going to have a moment to practice that with one another. Tell each other your fantasy vacation, and you are only practicing acceptance. Can I listen with encouragement and curiosity. But you can do this in a lot of ways. I also have here, I mentioned John Gottman. You can download, I don't have the link, what are called the Gottman card decks. They're free, Gottman, somebody type that. Gottman card decks. You can download them for free, and they're decks of questions. And they have all kinds of different little subtopics in them. But you just click one, and it's like, got a question. What do you want your life to look like 3 years from now? So it just has open-ended questions for you to practice accepting your partner's response. Gottman, Gottman, Gottman card decks. So 36 questions to fall in love, fantasy vacation, Gottman card decks. Those are all, oh, look. They are there. I told you. All right. I'm gonna keep going because I'm gonna run out of time. I read an article, I bet 3 weeks ago, about there's a phenomenon where people have an aversion to saying other people's names. We refer to other people as hey and you, right? Or we just start talking and we hope they know that we're talking to them. But even in marriages, and they were interviewing people who were saying, to say someone's name feels overly intimate. So I think for a lot of you, you're going to say, say their name. That's ludicrous. But say their name. It is a way of expressing, you are for me. I'm saying your name. I'm going to look at you and say your name. It takes less time than the 36 questions to fall in love. And then touch them. I know that sounds low stakes, but when couples start drifting in acceptance, they stop saying one another's names, and they stop touching one another. And again, I'm not talking about sex. Sex is good. I'm just talking about, can I put my hand on your shoulder? All right. That's acceptance. How do we get more commitment? You have to get a tattoo. That's it. You have to. Yeah. So I mentioned Scott Stanley. I'm going to go real quick here. I mentioned Scott Stanley a moment ago. One of the things that he points out in his research is that we have really, and he says we, like the United States, Western world, we have really good rituals to signal the beginning of commitment. We have these marriages, we give each other rings, we exchange vows, we eat cake, we invite people to watch us do it. But then we don't really have great rituals of expressing continued commitment over time. Once you got the ring, you got the ring. And it's that's it, right? You got the ring, what else is there? And Stanley points out we need to re-express our commitment periodically. And I think that's why things like anniversaries and Valentine's Day become important to us, is because they are these little opportunities to say, just reminding you I'm choosing you again. I know Valentine's Day is a completely made-up holiday to benefit, big greeting card or whatever. But it's also an opportunity to say, I'm letting you know I'm re-expressing my commitment. I'm restating my commitment. But there are other ways that we can do it. And I think these are silly. Like the coffee mugs, I think they're a little silly. But they're also they're just a way to signal to one another. Periodically, we don't have to renew our vows necessarily, but just every so once in a while, can we do something tangible? And that's the point that I'm trying to get at. There's a tangible representation of our commitment. And it might be coffee mugs, it might be a tattoo. I know lots of you are like, you're not going to get a tattoo. But one of the things I have on your tabletop time is pretend that you are going to get a tattoo. What does it look like? Design it together. What kind of tattoo would you get together? It would be a signal to one another that this is just for us. Nobody else has to see it or understand it. It's a signal for us where we're signaling to one another our continued commitment. All right, that is it. Thank you very much.